is Loretta Hayes at Hayes Sewing Machine Company in Wilmington, Delaware. And welcome back to our creative videos. This morning we are going to do a quilt that is done by Cherry Guidry. She is a fabulous quilter. She does Cherry Blossoms Quilting Studios, and she has created this lovely, lovely panel. Super, super beautiful. This would be a fabulous project if you want to put, say, a wall hanging in your studio, because it's got all kinds of sayings really for a sewist. Be a great gift if you have a sewist friend. So very, very nice. The pattern is called Quilter's Chalk, and it is a free download from the Benartex website. So it looks like this, looking on there. There's two color variations on it, so a kind of a warm color variation and a cool color variation. We're doing the warm one, the cool one. Yes, I know my cool and warm, yeah. And so if you've never done a modern quilting technique called kind of quilter's improv, where you kind of put random pieces together and build it as you go, this has a very improv feel to it. So I would say that this is a structured improv, because she's giving you where you're putting all the locations, but it is totally not piecing like you would have for a 9 patch or a 4 patch or a star. So really outside the box, very modern. There are essentially 2 blocks to the quilt. There are color variations, and we'll mention those as we go along. But let's actually start out with the 2 blocks. So if Pam, if you can page down here. So the first block, and there are 12 of these blocks. You're going to have your panel, and then we're going to have a strip of fabric, and we're going to have a row of squares, then a strip of fabric, and 2 different rectangles down
so
at the
it just
bottom.
looks white in the camera, so there's actually a piece of material.
So can I put a piece of
Got it.
me
Okay.
underneath of it so that we can go there? All right, so that gives us our first block. And actually, let's deal with that first. So the first thing that she's going to have you do in the directions is she's going to have you sew together 5 2.5-inch strips. Really, the only thing, she gives you the color coordination on it, but you're going to have your background fabric separating your prints. And because this was a kind of sewing themed, that's what we chose. So we have thimbles, we've got some like Bernina decorative stitch fabrics that are coming from Benartex. So just kind of some fun stuff. So you sew these, they're going to be salvage to salvage, so you're going to have a long run of them. And then to create this block format here, you're going to go ahead and cross cut them into a 2.5-inch section, which makes sense. We have a 2.5-inch strip. We are going to need to cross cut it 2.5 in order to make squares. Otherwise, they're rectangles. So we're going to start out, we're going to just do a quick clean of the edge. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to cut our strip at 2.5. And so you will end up cutting 12 of these, because there are 12 individual panels. All right, so that gets us the piece that we are going to be adding to the side. So that is step number 1. You get all of those done for all of those blocks all at one time. Then you're going to come in and you are going to be working with your panels. And let me see if I can just flip back in these directions. It was a little while ago when we cut these out. So we'll flip that down. Yeah, there you go. Sorry about that. So the panels are cut 7 1/4 inches wide by 10 inches long. Let me double check that 10 inches. Yeah, 10 inches even. So 7.5 inches going this way, 10 inches going this way, which was interesting because some of the panels go all the way to the edge. So you look at the printing on them and they go all the way to the edge. Some of them you have like a little bit of a seam allowance to it. So when I measured, I tried to make certain that I had an equal amount of seam allowance on either side. All right, so we are now going to take and do step number 1, and that is we are going to be adding a strip to the square units that we have done. The important thing about this is we want to be consistent about which square is at the top and the bottom. So in my quilt, the square that is at the bottom is always the thimbles. So that means that I need to sew this gray strip on the left-hand side of the strip because it's going to be in between these two. So we're going to go ahead and pick that up. I have pinned that because in some of the other blocks, I had to do a little bit of unsewing because I stitched it on the other side.
Never.
Yeah, unfortunately. And so we're going to just take off and we're going to stitch our gray strip on. So we're just lining up the edges, trying to keep the middle lined up. I got caught up on a seam allowance, but I think that'll work. All right. And so we're going to come to the end. We're going to go ahead and cut. And then I'm going to hop over and we're just going to go ahead and press that. And Pam, you can just hang out.
Should have a little sign, Loretta's ironing.
And so what I've done is I have pressed that to the gray. It naturally wants to go that way because the seam allowances, it makes it much easier to press it. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to join our panel piece to the unit that we have just created. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to place the panel on top. And the reason that I'm placing it on top is in a perfect world, our panel seam allowance should be exactly 1/4 inch. But if it's not, I want to make certain that I am stitching right along the edge of this green. I don't want to have it flip up and end up having a little bit of white showing. So I will, in that case, if I have an issue with it, I would sacrifice the perfect 1/4 inch and I would make sure that I'm stitching on the green line. So we're going to come down. And I found that it was pretty consistent. I didn't really have a huge issue with it. As I'm stitching down, I'm up against my guide and I'm pretty much stitching along the edge. But if I need to, I'll give it just a little bit of a push so I can stay right along that green line. All right, get that one cut. And we're going to press this. And this time we're going to once again press it towards the gray. Pam, just hang out. There's going to be a lot of hopping up and down. And that is one of the kind of things that improv does. Is you do like you sew a piece on, you press it, you then sew the next piece on. So as you're doing it, put your ironing board close to your...
Or it's a good way to get your steps in.
This is true. This is very, very true. All right, so we are going to be doing on this one, I just need to make sure which way we're going here. Pause, pause, pause. All right, so for this particular block, we are going to be putting this up at the top. Okay, and this is going to go over here. Now, I'll explain that variation in just a second. I just want to do a quick count out to make sure I've got the right numbers of...
And remember, there's one
Yep,
over there.
yep, no, I just wanted to make sure that I had it in the correct thing. All right, so we are good. So we are now going to take this white piece and we're going to place this at the top. So we're going to line up. This is an even weave, so there is not a ton of difference between the right and wrong side. And if you ever have a fabric that is that way, it's really difficult to tell. They refer to it as the skin test. So if you put your hand behind the white strip, you'll see that look. And then if I flip it over, it's very obvious which is the right and the wrong side. It may not be in the camera, but it is in real life. And so if you're uncertain, put your hand under there and you can usually figure it out easily. And so we'll come along.
I was just giggling in my mind. That's if your skin has some contrast.
Yes, if we're doing this in the middle of January, all of our English heritage will come out. You know, we're kind of a little translucent at that time of year, I understand. But even then, it still will work. Smart out. All right, last thing. Yes, I did. Last thing to do to this block is to simply take and place this rectangle unit that I previously sewed onto the top. And so we'll come in. But you can see how fun this is because we've done this really quite large block and we haven't had to quilt tack at all because there were no points that were lining up. So it's a really fast, fun piece. We'll give a quick press. And then Pam, do you want to go around the other side of the table and we'll kind of talk about the variations. So in her directions, she's very clear about what she wants. So all of these blocks are similar, right? So we all have the thimbles at the very bottom of our row of blocks. We have a strip next door to that row, and it's in between our saying. So the variations are this. You are going to have 2 color strips. So in mine, it's a green and a gray. So to start with, you are going to do 4 blocks that have got the green strip attached to the squares in between the sayings. Mm-hmm. Okay, once we have that unit done, we are then going to take and add our white stripe and then our 2 sets of rectangles.
Okay.
Those are being added to the bottom.
Okay.
So you will have 4 blocks that look like that. The next set of blocks are going to be blocks that have got a gray stripe in it. Once again, we're going to have 4 of them. Once again, it's going to be exactly really the same piecing as what we've got here. We're just varying the color. So the small blocks are gray strip, are saying, white, and 2 rectangle units. And she'll tell you what colors to do. Then you're going to come over here and you're going to do 2 blocks with a gray strip again. But this time, so this unit here and this unit here are exactly the same.
Got it.
But when we go to add the white stripe is at the top of the saying, not at the bottom. So the rectangle units, when you're reading the saying, you know, all of the words are upright, not dyslexically flipped around, okay? You're going to have 2 blocks with a gray stripe that has got the white stripe and the rectangle units at the top. And this is the one that I actually just did. Okay? And then you're going to have 2 more that have got the green stripe, and then once again the white stripe at the top. So 4 and 4 where the white stripe is at the bottom, 2 and 2 where the white stripe is at the top. So 4 plus 4 is 8, plus 2 is 10, plus 2 is 12, and that's the number of the panels. All right, so once you get those done, keep them separate in blocks so you don't have to resort them all the time. And then let's go and do our secondary block that's going to give us some spacing. The secondary block, very, very easy to do. It's really just some rectangles with the white stripe. So you see we have a large rectangle here, and then once again we've got a gray, so the same kind of contrast we had over here. So we've got a fatter rectangle and a skinnier rectangle, and we're adding our white strip to the bottom there. And then we have our a fatter rectangle and our green, and this time we're going to be adding it to the top. So let's go ahead and do that. So we've got our pieces cut here. And so what we want to pay attention to is I want to have my machines not up on top of their heads. You know, I don't want it flipped around. So you'll see when I'm looking at my block, I've got my Berninas all facing up here. Okay, and then I'm going to make certain that I'm putting the green on the left-hand side of that. So I'll come in and we'll grab that. You just want to be kind of a little bit deliberate with this because it's not so obvious. You know, once again, we're not doing a 9 patch where we're used to the rules. And so we're going to line up and we're going to sew our long seam. Okay, we'll give this a quick press. We'll go towards the machines because they're darker. And so in this block, we're going to be attaching the white strip to the top. Once again, let's just make sure that we have right sides together. I love white on white prints. They kind of give your quilt a sparkle to it. Just a little bit more interesting than just doing, say, a white solid. But it's so easy to have one block flipped. So definitely check it each time. All right. So we'll give this a quick press. And we should have 4 blocks that have the green on the left and the white on the top. And we should have 4 blocks that have the gray on the right and the white on the bottom. And we have made all the blocks that we need to do. So we're going to pause and I'm going to do a layout of this quilt so you can see how this is going to go together. All right, so we're back and we're now ready to lay out the quilt. I have sewn together one row and then I'm going to show you how I used her map to lay it out. So if you want to scan down, Pam, for a second. So when you're looking at her map, there are 4 rows to this quilt. Each of the rows are going to have 5 blocks. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And each of the rows are going to have 3 white strips that she labels A in the cutout. Excuse me, I in the cutout. All right, so when you're laying out a row, so you're going to start out, we're going to do row 2, And so you're looking at it and you're like, oh man, they look all the same. So all I did is I paid attention to the saying. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to find the saying first. So I'm going to do this one here. And so that one's going to go like that. Then next door to it is going to be our 3 rectangle block, and it's the one with the white strip at the top. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to grab that one. So we'll pop that one in there. In between those two, I need my eye. So that's the white strip. That's just really kind of a spacer strip. So we'll pop that in there. All right, so we'll need another eye after this block. So we'll come in and pop that in there. And then we're gonna come in and we are looking for the one with the navy blue saying at the bottom. So that's easy. Our friendship is a patchwork of love.
Oh.
Actually, the sayings on here are wonderful. What I was thinking when I was doing this is we chose sewing fabrics because it was kind of a sewing theme, but at the same time, there's very much like birds and flowers and that kind of thing on the sayings. So like you could do this with a really pretty floral print. And Pam was saying in the kind of pause that how would it look if you did it with like a black strip in between as opposed to a white strip. And I think that that would make the sayings pop really, really nicely. So super, super cool. All right, back to my map here. So we have done our first block, okay, aqua saying, their next one with the stripe at the top, then the navy blue saying, and then we have the 3 rectangle with the strip at the bottom. And there's no eye in between this. And the last one we're looking for is the one with the big daisy. And so, boom, we've got the row done. So literally, we're just going to sew right sides together to create our row. And each of the rows is done that same way. So what's fabulous is there is no joining point. So there's no place for you to do a quilt tack. There's no place where you have to fudge a corner. You're simply going to go ahead and sew it together in the row. Once that row is done, and you've got your second row, there is a spacer strip called J that's going to go in the middle. So we're not even going to have a place where we need to do a quilt tack from row to row. So I'm going to go ahead and sew all of this together, and then we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about the borders, because she's done very modern borders, not the typical all the way around the borders. And welcome back. So we have our quilt all sewn together, and I gotta say, this is the first quilt in I can't remember how long that there were no quilt tacks needed. So we completed our rows. We put a J row, which is a 2.5 inch white strip in between each row. So we had a J row at the top, then here's our first row, then a J, our second row, third, and working all the way down. Yes, it's longer than we can put on the film. So because there is this white 2.5 inch strip in between the rows, there were no places where we needed to do any quilt tacks whatsoever. So what I thought was really cool is what she did with the borders. So the borders were, I mean, it's a very modern quilt to start with. And so the borders, she's kept with the same modern feel to it. So basically, once you have the rows together, you're going to join, steal a pen here, you're going to join your fabrics for the side border. So we are going to create kind of a white frame around the side of the quilt. However, the size of the strip is different. So this is like, I believe, if memory serves, it's a 4.5-inch wide strip as opposed to the 2.5 on the top. So that is going to create our frame around our quilt. At which point we have 2 more borders that we want to do. So one is a skinny border and one is a larger border. And what's cool about them is you don't have to stitch them, like I don't have to put the skinny border on and press it and then do the big border. I could literally put the 2 of them together because they're not going to have any bend around the corner. And so these are literally going to come up on the top here and down on the bottom. They will not be on the side of the quilt. So if we flip over here to the picture, you can see these are the long white strips that I have left to sew. And then we have the skinny and the wide border coming down on the bottom and on the top. Now, the one thing that you need to know if you're going to pick fabric the same as I've got in mine is that the fabric, this larger border piece, was originally designed to be cut out of the same fabric that we did the large rectangles, the sewing machines. But if you cut it out as the directions tell you, then your strips are going to be going sideways. And I didn't like that. I didn't want to have my machines going sideways. So the big question of the day is, are you going to take and seam a bunch of them together so that you can cut them where these are on the vertical? And I didn't. So there was some extra fabric from what they recommended for the green.
Good
the
choice.
Green words.
Good choice.
And it's not directional. So literally, I just cut 3 strips and I just replaced the fabric on there. But that is something to keep in mind on that larger border. You don't really want to have something that's directional because you're going to have to do a ton of piecing to do it. And honestly, this quilt is so fast to piece that I don't know why you'd go through the trouble of fussing with it. I love this quilt pattern. As I was doing it, I kind of thought, how cool would it be to just use the measurements? So we had the 7.5 by 10 for the actual original, what do they call it, Pam?
Block?
The block, yes, but the panel.
Sorry.
I couldn't get the word. So that drove that original measurement, and I'm sure she built the quilt entirely around it. But how cool would it be to use that 7.5 by 10 to highlight a larger scale print? So it would be a great quilt, and it could look nothing like this, just in different fabrics using her math on there. So I hope you enjoyed this. I'm super excited about it. I'm going to get the border sewn on and get it quilted up really quickly. And if, whatever. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.